So this project for Clip essentially began as a fairly sort of a like almost like a hackathon kind of a project where I just wanted to kind of find a solution for myself. I was like, this is painful. I only need assist for a small percentage of this ride. I don't need the assist all the way through. I mean, of course, e-bikes were the obvious kind of go-to solution. So a typical e-bike is an over-engineered solution for this problem, right? Like you don't need a giant battery for 3 to 6 mile commute. You can really like optimize that battery motor footprint to a point where it can be a portable thing. You can attach it to your bicycle when you need it and detach it when you don't need it. And that was kind of the beginning, sort of the seed idea for Clip.
So this is yet another interesting entrepreneurial story coming your way. A classic one where finding a solution to your personal problem leads to building a brand and a business. Stay tuned, this is going to be fun. Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of the Mission Shunya podcast. First things first, hope you're doing well. A lot of wishes are coming my way as we approach 100 episodes. If you are one among them who wrote a review on iTunes or sent your wishes to missionshunya@gmail.com, thank you very much. It definitely means a lot. Ratings and review on any platform help in the show's discoverability, and recently, Power Market, a cleantech platform based out of the UK, listed Mission Shunya podcast among the top sustainability podcasts to listen to. Thanks to you and to Abhinav and team at Power Market for the mention. Towards the end of last episode, I did mention about mobility being the topic for this episode. Well, yes, it is going to be about mobility. The reason I did mention early on, which is rather unusual for me, is because I enjoy riding my bicycle, and the story that we are going to hear on this episode is an interesting design add-on that converts any bike into an electric bike. I like the product design, and here is the story. So, as is the tradition, let's hear from our guest, who is...
Hi, I'm Som. I am the CEO and co-founder for Clip. It's the world's first plug-and-play e-bike upgrade.
So, Som, the first thing that I ask every guest, although I know all about their work before they come on the podcast, but I still end up asking this question because it's very different when you hear the story directly from them. In your case, you started off as an architect and then you moved on to be a designer and now you're an entrepreneur. So how has this journey been like? What was the common thread throughout?
That's an interesting question with a, hopefully not a too long-winded an answer. So I grew up in Chandigarh, which, in India, it was, a very different kind of Indian city. It was one of the first modern cities, built post-independence, designed by Corbusier. So the architecture in that city was very different from anything else that's part of Indian culture. So growing up there, I always had this pull towards the modern aesthetic, and I kind of moved into studying architecture. I guess kind of inspired, or that the whole idea was kind of incepted by just living there. So I studied architecture and in Gurgaon. And yeah, I think one interesting thing about, studying architecture is it allows you to be a generalist. It allows you to be a master of none, but, a jack of many trades. So,
Interesting.
so you would delve into, philosophy, literature, physics, and a whole bunch of really interesting ideas and concepts, and sort of enables you, or rather empowers you, to start building an interesting, idea about culture, about and in that space, you not only look at the human lived experience through the lens of buildings or cities, but also through the lens of objects and everyday, tools. So it encompasses the whole sort of experience in that sense. So it makes you think about all of those things.
Correct.
So that was kind of the beginning of thinking about how do we evolve as modern beings through our tools. How do our tools improve? So that, I guess, that's kind of one way to kind of look at how I got into this.
Interesting. And it also helped you move places from Chandigarh to now where you are in the US. So that's also an interesting journey. You had another opportunity to study abroad and then get into starting Clip, right?
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing was, although the study of architecture is extremely interesting, the practice of it is almost as uninspiring, especially when you're working in a large architectural firm. You're kind of like a cog in a machine. You're one of my experiences right after undergrad in Delhi was working in a large sort of architectural firm in Delhi. And although we were doing interesting projects, like I was working on projects like the Delhi metro stations,
Hmm.
but my role was so minuscule, drafting one small aspect in one large station. And so I did that for quite a while, trying to pursue a career as an architect. And then it kind of came to a point that it all kind of felt the same. And I figured I needed to kind of have a step change. And so I decided to kind of pursue a master's in architectural design, and I came to the US for the first time. I came to Columbia University in New York, and that was the next kind of phase where I could engage with some of these heroes, these architectural heroes, these theoretical sort of heroes as well, whom I had read when I was in architectural school, like Kenneth Frampton, Bernard Tschumi, Peter Eisenman. Like, just meeting and engaging with all these people brought all of that inspiration back. And then I worked in New York for another sort of architectural theorist designer called Michael Sorkin, and all of that experience kind of led me sort of a little further away from pure architectural practice, but more into the inquiry of the human experience through the different tools that we design.
That's interesting. That's interesting story of how the entire journey around being an architect has taken you to right where you are. Now coming to that. So there are a lot of problems to solve in the world and a lot of problems for designers to solve as well. The idea for Clip, an e-bike retrofit solution, if I were to put it that way, for everyone to kind of get a hold of it, where did this come from?
So, I mean, without sort of resorting to the direct sort of visceral experience that I had
Hmm.
more recently, I kind of want to draw the thread a little further back when I was working for Michael Sorkin. And in that office, in that studio,
Hmm.
I was working with Michael Sorkin, Mitch Joachim, who's another brilliant architectural sort of provocateur who kind of builds these, futurist ideas of cities and how people live in them, how cities could evolve, how, human experiences in cities could evolve. And he introduced me to this idea of looking at urban mobility from a completely new sort of way. I mean, I grew up in India. I used to go to work, like hanging out of buses, you know, in Delhi, in peak traffic, and traffic was just there. It was, part of the human experience. There was no way to think about it, think about, urban congestion or anything else like that,
Correct.
being an architect. But being in working with some of these guys, like, Mitch, for example, he talked to me about this group that he was part of at MIT called the Smart Cities Group, led by this, again, this brilliant man called Bill Mitchell.
Hmm.
And in this group, they were kind of looking at the future of urban mobility, and their lens was just so wide. They were looking at, not just electric mobility, but how do you kind of, reduce urban congestion by, just compressing the footprint of a car, for example. So we were looking at kind of stackable cars, folding cars, just a bunch of really radical solutions, which were provocative enough to kind of make you think of, just new ways to engage with that problem. So he kind of encouraged me to apply to MIT, become a part of this group, and I went to MIT, and I ended up kind of going there to this group and working with them for over 2 years, and and that kind of introduced me to this idea of urban mobility.
Nice.
So, and how to kind of think about solving for it. But it was only recently, like 3-4 years ago. I mean, like the bicycle has been around for so long, like you often ignore it
Correct.
as the power of it is often ignored.
True.
It's a brilliant machine. It is the most efficient kind of transfer of human energy into locomotion. It is, it's perfect. It's, it has the minimal footprint. It has just the right amount of, range for typical urban, needs in terms of mobility. So, I picked up the bicycle for this reason. I thought, I would reduce my carbon footprint, I would become healthier, and I used it every day. And I realized quite quickly that even though it is a great, perfect, almost nearly perfect solution, it can be made better, because every day I would kind of ride back and forth from work to home, and I would be really frustrated with it. Like the honeymoon period of like riding the bicycle and feeling good about it kind of lasted about a month and a half, until you do it every day, and in the evenings you're like, "Oh, this is painful," like going up a hill. So this project for Clip essentially began as a fairly sort of a, like almost like a hackathon kind of a project, where I just wanted to kind of find a solution for myself. I was like, this is painful. I only need assist for a small percentage of this ride. I don't need the assist all the way through.
Correct.
I mean, of course, e-bikes were the obvious kind of go-to solution. But, from all of my experience working at the Smart Cities Lab, knowing all the data around urban mobility, that around 50 to 60% of all urban passenger commutes are, between 3 to 6 miles. So a typical e-bike is an over-engineered solution for this problem, right? Like, you don't need a giant battery for, 3 to 6 mile commute. You can really like optimize that battery motor footprint to a point where it can be a portable thing. You can attach it to your bicycle when you need it and detach it when you don't need it. And that was kind of the beginning, sort of the seed idea for Clip.
No, that's true. And especially I kind of resonate with how you felt. But especially if your terrain has a lot of ups and downs and you want to do it daily, e-bikes have definitely got really popular just because of that, because you just need a short kick for a stress-free ride for that matter. But interestingly, you didn't go the traditional route and you went in a unique way where you said like a lot of bikes are going to be normal bikes. We should just need to give them an option where they just use it as a retrofit, but they can take it back. So that is a very good design. I'm sure a lot of people, when they see the artworks for this episode, will realize the design is really very unique. So how did that design come about? Like how long did you take to get to refine that particular design? You have the motor, you have the battery, everything packed into it.
Right. And, you're absolutely right. I mean, rather than like creating a completely new bicycle with a motor, uh, the clear idea was, there are about like a billion bicycles that already exist in this world. So how can we design something which is really a plug and play solution, right? So the idea kind of began from there. Like it had to be plug and play. It couldn't be something where you had to kind of fiddle around with your tools and like attach a pre-install. Like it had to be something where I could use it on one bike, and then if I wanted to go to another city, I could carry this thing with me and use it on the shared bike in that city.
Correct.
So when that was the conceptual kind of origin, I thought about like the different drivetrains that I could possibly use, right? So typically an e-bike you could drive through three essential, uh, ways. You could have a hub motor, which is inside the wheel. You could have, a mid drive, which is, a crank, a motor, which is part of the crank. And then thirdly, you could have this really interesting solution, which, was, I think, which originated first. I think the idea came about in the 1800s, actually, just around the time after the bicycle came about. And it was a friction drive concept where you would essentially have a roller driving one of the wheels of your bicycle. And the French did it super successfully with the Velosolics, which was an extremely popular solution from the 1940s to the 80s. They sold about 8 million units worldwide. Just a beautifully designed machine. It had a small internal combustion engine in the front with a roller, aluminium roller, and it would drive the front wheel. And that was, I knew that if it had to be a plug and play thing, if something had to be fully detachable from the main unit, this was the drive principle that I had to kind of go to. So, and then when I started thinking about, if I'm going to put it on this bicycle, if it has to be like a friction drive roller, should I put it on the front wheel? Should I put it on the back wheel? Right?
Correct.
And then so plug and play was the first axis. The other axis was compatibility. I wanted this to be compatible with 90% of the bikes that are in the world, right?
Hmm.
So now most bicycles, commuter bicycles. Now I'm not talking about uh, sort of off road, kind of sort of BMX kind of bicycles, but I'm talking about commuter bicycles, the kind that you see the Dutch use every day, or the bicycles in India, or the regular sort of everyday bicycle. So they all need to have fenders. They all need to have bike racks in the back. And also, if you look at shared bikes, the rear wheel is all completely sort of covered. There is no exposure there. So, which is why the decision became to put it on the front. And then it kind of went from there. Okay, how do we attach it to the front in a way that is elegant, which is which has symmetrically kind of weighted. So then we kind of that whole idea kind of originated like this. And then it took me about 2 months, 2.5 months to build the first proof of concept, which was a super hacky concept. I can send you a photo of it. It just looks really hacky, but it worked. It was a good proof of concept. I knew that the kind of power that I was going to use, the kind of battery and the motor that I was going to use, it would be enough. It would be just optimal for a single rider for a distance of 8 to 15 miles.
Interesting. Now, what has the initial response been like? I know that the product is not officially out, but you have done a lot of test rides, if I were to put it that way, and you have sold it to a lot of early adopters in the market. So, how is the feedback like?
The feedback has been surprisingly exciting,
Wonderful.
which is really great to see. Mainly because we have not done any marketing. We're a young startup, and as a CEO, my focus is not on marketing. Has not been on marketing for the past year. It has mostly, my goal is to kind of focus on unit economics. How do I make this thing in a way that is scalable, that can be sold at a price point which is affordable to every person who wants to use their bicycle more. It has to be a no-brainer in terms of the unit economics. So because we are kind of looking at, or rather because we didn't do any marketing,
Hmm.
All of our kind of awareness around Clip has happened through just publications who have been very excited about this new device that it's the world's first plug and play e-bike upgrade. Nothing like this existed before or exists even now.
Correct.
So so we were on Time Magazine. We were one of the first. We were one of the 100 best inventions of the year. We were on Fast Company. We were on a national show called Innovation Nation, Ford's Innovation Nation, on the network called CBS in the US. We've also been on Japanese television, which is kind of interesting.
Nice.
So yeah, the response is great. We have about 1,500 pre-orders that we've received over the past year and a half, and right now, we've shipped 200 units. People have been using it. We've clocked over 8,000 miles across these units over the past year, and the response is great, and we are kind of getting ready to scale this year. So we are at that inflection point where we are going to start producing close to 500 units a month from the mid of Q2 onwards.
That's wonderful. Now, you did mention about this being noticed in a lot of different markets, different regions. And I think that also coincided with the post pandemic boom for e bikes. Now, from a business point of view, I have to ask you about the market. We did see e bikes having a good market in the pandemic and post pandemic times when people kind of really wanted to use that rather than avoid getting into a train or any shared transportation involving a lot of people. Now, with the post pandemic shift, what's your view on how this is going to shape up?
So, there are two sort of indicators. One, of course, the boom. I mean, people try to hype up, and they have kind of hyped up booms in the past. I think the oil crisis in the 60s was the boom which everybody had hyped up, and everybody was buying bicycles in the US at that time.
Correct.
In the 60s, when that oil crisis happened, uh, there was a massive boom in the US. Worldwide, there was a massive boom in bicycling.
Hmm.
Certain countries, adopted it in their policies, especially the Dutch. I mean, if you look at urban planning in the Netherlands pre, 1960s, pre 1950s, it was all the automobile. I mean, they were not bicycling like this before.
Hmm.
So the fact that policy helped bring that into mainstream,
Hmm.
turned the tide for bicycling in Europe at the time. But it went the opposite way in the US, unfortunately, during that time. However, during this boom, after the pandemic boom, there is massive work happening in terms of policy to bring bicycling into the mainstream in the US. So that's a great indicator and a good news for us, or bicycle enthusiasts and bicycle advocates. But the other thing is, the market is it's kind of plateaued a little bit because obviously there was a boom, there was a spike during that time, but there is strong growth in the market. There is a projection from multiple sort of reports, business reports, which kind of indicate that the popularity of e-bikes, especially in the bike sector, there is a trend towards e-bikes.
Correct.
So popularity of e-bikes is growing; it's not slowing down, and it's expected. It's currently at about 50 billion in 2022, and it's expected to get to 80 billion by 2027. So for us, what's really interesting is the question is not whether these billions will move to e-bikes or not in the next 5 years. The question is, what is going to emerge as the most convenient and affordable way for all these millions who are going to move to e-bikes or who are going to want to have access to e-bikes, and that's where I think Clip comes in because it is one of the most affordable sort of e-bike upgrades that allow you to kind of have an e-bike when you want it, go back to like a regular bike. You don't need any bike.
Exactly. I mean, I personally like that part of it more because a lot of people live in apartments and other places where they don't want to leave their electrical component of the bike outside, which can be actually taken off. In this, you can rather take it up, go home, charge the battery, and then put it back when you need. Now, Soman, on the final note, like for example, you have done pre-orders, pre-shipments now. So, what's the plan for a full-scale launch? And I assume your initial market will be in the US, but of course, this is a global product. Europe has a big market for electric bikes in general. You did mention about the Dutch being a big market. So, what's the plan like for Clip in the next few years?
Yeah, I think that's exactly a great question. I mean, that's exactly what we're kind of working on. So we are. I mean, one thing I don't know if you know, but we are building these units in India.
Interesting.
Our manufacturing is set up in Coimbatore in India. Now we're selling it in the US. So our goal for this year is North America. We are going to, I mean, Europe is just such an exciting market for us because there is such a high density of bicycles. The bicycle
Correct.
culture is way more advanced and sophisticated. If you go to Amsterdam, people don't really like typical e-bikes because they already have hundreds, thousands of these regular bicycles that they use every day. So Clip is a great sort of like an upgrade for those bikes which already exist because it makes their life a little bit easier without having to spend all of that money in buying a completely new e-bike, which is also way too fast for bike lanes, for example. So Europe is very exciting for us. We are working on a variant for India and emerging economies because currently, even at a price point of $550,
Hmm.
it's not a price point that is ideal for India. So we're working on a variant which we are going to design specifically for India, for Africa. So that's in the works. And then we are also very interested in deploying our solution for bike share networks.
Nice.
And bike share networks are really interesting to us because if you look at sort of traditional bike shares have you know that have sort of gained sort of popularity, there is always a push to kind of upgrade those bicycles to e-bikes.
Correct.
And like typical sort of robust shareable e-bikes are just way expensive for all of these bike share companies. Like large bike share companies can do it, but smaller sort of tier 2 cities, it's just a very large kind of capital expense which they basically just pass on to their consumers.
True.
So with Clip, we are sort of very excited because we can provide the same functionality at a fraction of the cost, which also enables the bike share networks to have the same benefits of an e-bike. So an e-bike typically gets 3 times more ridership than a regular, legacy bike in a bike share network.
Correct.
So they can kind of boost their ridership with at a fraction of the cost. We've kind of already signed POs with, two sort of bike share networks in this country, in New York. So we are kind of excited about that as well. So we are going to run some pilots, and as we build on those pilots, and we'll kind of extend that to other bike share networks as well.
That's wonderful. A lot of opportunities, definitely. So that also leads me to my other question finally on as a startup, the other key aspect is about investment. And you did mention about having a factory in India that's actually probably contract manufacturing for you. But to scale up to different geographies, you need a different approach. So how was things around raising capital and those coming along?
Raising capital is always tricky. Especially when you're running a startup, and especially if you're running a hardware startup, I think it just compounds the, the difficulties, right?
Exactly.
So we are currently actually raising around. We are raising, an extension of our seed, which we are looking to close over the next, 20 to 30 days. So we are raising around, and we are gearing up to essentially execute on our, sort of growth milestones for this year.
Wonderful. So it's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you, especially first observing the product and being a bike rider myself. I know what is the challenge in kind of using a regular bike, and then what is the advantage of an e-bike as well. So I kind of found this solution very interesting, novel. And being based in India, I'm also looking forward to have this product some point so that I can use it as an add-on to my existing regular bike.
Absolutely.
So it's a wonderful product, and I'm sure a lot of people will be interested because just like me, they would want to have something that they can carry back home when they leave their bikes in public parkings or metro stations and then go plug this back and then take the bike back home. So this is something unique, very interesting. Wishing you a lot of success with your new fundraising and also the development activities. I'm sure a lot of people who use it will really like it, and it's just going to spread to a wider audience. So thanks again for taking time to join me on the podcast today.
Absolutely, Girish. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
And that was a wrap on the feature segment. You should definitely check Clip if you want to convert your normal bike into an electric bike. The link, as usual, will be in the show notes section of this episode. And yes, they are also running a fundraise campaign, which should be on if you happen to listen to this episode right after the release. So do check and get in the game if you're really interested. And yes, I should also thank Venkatesh Gopal, a good friend of the podcast, for recommending Som to join me for a chat. Special thanks as always goes out to Terra Generation for all the cover arts they have been creating for every episode. They are a content agency specialized in telling stories in climate, biodiversity and sustainability. For more info, check terrageneration.com. Well, with that, this is a wrap on this episode. I will be back in 2 weeks' time. Until then, this is Girish Shivakumar signing off. And as always, thank you for listening.